Welcome to Intangibles, a podcast about traits, behaviors, and qualities that entrepreneurs can cultivate to help be successful. I'm your host, Steve BERG. I'm a partner at a New York City-based venture capital fund called Lehigh Ventures. Lehigh Ventures focuses on early-stage investments of companies that drive corporate intelligence. Corporate intelligence includes, for example, cybersecurity, data and analytics, and artificial intelligence. You can find us at www.lyticalventures.com. Lytical is spelled Lytical, Ventures, all one word, .com. This season is brought to you by Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. We have a new production partner this season, VC Careers. If you're looking for a job in venture capital, join over 8,000 VCs and VC job hunters on John Gannon's VC Jobs email list. Visit johngannonblog.com/intangibles to learn more and to subscribe. Also, please find Intangibles on its new home on the web, www.intangiblespodcast.com. There are a couple of quotes about mental toughness that I think are pertinent to today's discussion. Steve Prefontaine, one of America's most famous middle distance runners, said, "A lot of people run a race to see who's the fastest. I run to see who has the most guts." And Chris Evert, one of America's most famous tennis players, said, "Competitive toughness is an acquired skill and not an inherited gift." What I like about these quotes is the thing that I always seem to like when I learn about a supposed intangible quality, that these soft skills are not God-given gifts, but rather traits that can be cultivated. Prefontaine is talking about a willingness to endure the pain of pushing oneself mentally and physically. And Chris Evert is saying that practice is the key. So to me, the question is not, can we push ourselves forward? The question is, how do we? My guest today is Dr. Jarrod Spencer, a sports psychologist whose passion is to assist athletes in attaining peak performance through sound emotional health. He works with professional Olympic, college, and high school athletes, as well as coaches and teams across the country. In addition to serving as a sports psychologist for athletic teams at schools such as the University of Maryland, Old Dominion University, Lehigh University, and Lafayette College, Dr. Spencer also works individually with athletes from University of Michigan, University of North Carolina, Ohio State, Cal Poly, Princeton, and many more. Dr. Spencer is the president and founder of Mind of the Athlete, a sports psychology company committed to improving the emotional health of athletes. He is also the creator of Mind of the Athlete program. Dr. Spencer, welcome to Intangibles Podcast. It's great to be face-to-face with you today.
It's a pleasure to be with you as well.
Before we dive in on mental preparation, I wonder if there's a story you can share about an athlete that you've worked with and an achievement that person had that you were particularly proud of.
It was a few years ago at the Pocono Indy race. Sage Karam is a young driver, about 21 years old, and he's leading with only 13 laps to go and about to win the Indy race and have his greatest moment of his career, when suddenly, without any clear reason, his car spun out of control and went 225 miles into the concrete barrier and was obliterated. The pieces of the car flew everywhere, and drivers were moving left and right to get away from the debris. One piece bounced off the track a few times and then landed on the head of another driver. That driver was seriously injured, and so was Sage. Both went to the hospital. And sadly, what was found was that other driver that was hit in the head, he actually died from the crash, from that debris. And Sage's world, which was in one moment the pinnacle of happiness and joy, turned within seconds to the lowest moment of his life with great sadness at the loss of his friend who was killed. I came along Sage after that journey, and we went on this fantastic exploration for several months where I really helped him to process the high and the low and put it all back together again before his next time in an IndyCar race, which was the Indianapolis 500 the following year. Thankfully, Sage did the work, and to his credit, he was ready for that race. USA Today did a wonderful feature on Sage and about my ability to help him come back from such adversity. And to Sage's credit, he did really well that race, and he's continued to do well along his journey in IndyCar.
Wow, not exactly a three-pointer at the buzzer there, but yeah, kind of an amazing story of bringing an athlete along. Okay, so let's try and dive in here. As a sports psychologist, your view is that mental and emotional preparation are as important for any contest as the physical preparation. Is that correct?
It's not.
No.
It's actually more important.
Oh.
You see, you can talk to any 75-year-old athlete, former athlete today, and they'll tell you that the gains they made physically, they've long left them. But the gains they made mentally, they are very much still with them.
Yeah, I often hear about that, what it meant to an athlete at the time and how they took that into their life going forward. So that makes perfect sense. Would you say that this can apply to your average Joe as much as a world-class athlete, though?
Again, I'd say more so.
Okay.
Because every one of us in our own endeavors in life struggle with the real battleground, which is the mind.
Right. Right. Is it fair also to make the leap that you can use this kind of mental and emotional toolbox for non-athletic pursuits? For example, just things that we do in our everyday lives so that we can execute at a higher level.
People are people. The athlete might seem like they all have it together and they're using these at these very unique situations, and that may be true at times. But the reality is, whether you're a father, a teacher, a firefighter, husband, the mind relates to every single one of us in every single thing that we do every day.
Right. So in reading up for this, one of your key premises on performance is that when the preconscious mind is clearer, productivity increases, focus becomes sharper, and energy level is heightened. Let's start there. Can you explain that premise a little bit?
Absolutely. The key to high performance is the preconscious mind. It's a little known part of the mind that Freud actually talked about 100 years ago that I found to be fascinating and very relevant for high performance. By definition, the preconscious mind is the place in your mind where memories are stored that can easily be recalled, but they're outside of your immediate awareness. It's kind of like when you're cooking. You might cook the chicken on the front burner, but on the back burner, you have the rice simmering. That's like the preconscious mind. And you become aware of what's in the preconscious mind when your mind is idle, or maybe when your head hits the pillow and you start thinking, or maybe some people say they do their best thinking when they're out for a run, clearing the preconscious mind. Another time that you're aware of what's in the preconscious mind is when you're driving down the highway and you realize, I just missed my exit because I was so deep in thought in the preconscious mind.
Right. Okay. In context, though, so we have a conscious mind, we have a preconscious mind, we have a subconscious mind, just so we understand what are all the pieces here. How do we make those up?
Absolutely. Think of an iceberg floating in the ocean.
Okay.
10% of what you see above the waterline, conscious mind, sound of my voice, the noises around you. 90% of your mind is subconscious. The waterline actually represents the psychological defenses, your mind's skills and ability to block out what needs to be blocked out and stay focused on the task at hand. That's not likely new information for most people.
Right.
But what is new information is that the subconscious mind is broken up into 3 key layers.
The preconscious, which is one of them, and I
Yes.
assume there's 2 more.
There is. The bottommost layer is called the unconscious mind. It's a place in your mind where memories are stored that you really can't recall. first 5 years of life, significant traumas and dramas. The middle layer is a term that I coined. It's called the ex-conscious mind. It refers to that part of your mind where outdated, less useful information is being stored. Think of a past birthday, maybe your 21st birthday. You don't need to remember the events from that day, but it's just tucked in your ex-conscious mind. But the key is the preconscious mind, that layer just below the psychological defenses. That is the most important part of high performance.
Okay, great. So as I understand it, when we start at the unconscious, that's almost darkness. Yeah. And then as we slowly move along a continuum, we have a little bit more light. So there's a little bit more recall up till the subconscious mind, or through the ex-conscious, up to the subconscious mind. That's still kind of grayish. Then we get to the conscious mind. Lights are on. That's the things that we got to. Okay.
Well
said. I think I've got it.
Well said.
All right. So what is in the preconscious mind that we actually need to clear out?
Emotionally charged life experiences. That the reality is life is very emotional. Yet too often we're so busy going from task to task, never really processing well the emotionality of all the things that are happening during the day. Whether they're good or whether they're bad, the emotionality of life really needs to be addressed and processed.
I see. So the notion is that when we clear that out, we calm ourselves down.
Absolutely.
Okay. So is this the reason, or there's probably more reasons too, that productivity, we talked about productivity increases, focus becomes sharper, energy level becomes heightened when we clear that out, right?
We're all so busy.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that are flooding the preconscious mind every single day, and we're not taking the time to address it. So as soon as somebody sits down to really focus and read a book or cut through some emails or have an engaged conversation, they find their mind drifting to all these random places. The reality is it's the accumulation of all this stuff that is sneaking up on us and stealing our attention away.
Right. Okay. Is there anything physiological happening at the same time that you're aware of in terms of this, like, what's going on in the preconscious and the actual calming of the preconscious?
The amygdala.
Oh,
yes.
There you go.
The amygdala is an almond-shaped structure, bilateral, and sits on the edge of the hippocampus, which is kind of a U-shaped structure. I know I sound a little nerdy right now. And the hippocampus...
You're a doctor, after all. I think you're allowed.
The hippocampus takes short-term memory and converts it to long-term memory. And the amygdala sits right on the edge of that as kind of a filter. And so whenever life happens and there's something very emotional, those memories get seared into the amygdala as a protective mechanism. It's like when you were little and your mom said to you, "Don't touch that, that's hot." And you did. And your mom said to you,
"Told ya."
Next time your mom says to you, "That's hot," right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is we're all going through our days. And the reality is there's so much emotionality that's happening that the amygdala is constantly flaring up saying, "Hey, wait, we've been in a situation like this before. Let's be careful here." And so the amygdala is doing a wonderful job, but sometimes it's almost overactive.
Oh, right. Or could it possibly kind of like become clogged? Like it's just got too much to process? Or
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's when we hear of individuals say, "I thought I was having the big one. I thought this was the heart attack." But the reality was it was an anxiety attack. Mm-hmm. And the preconscious mind is so flooded that the alarm system has signaled it in the body, the fight or flight response. And one's like, there's no saber-toothed tiger jumping out at me, but it's the accumulation of all of these small little stressors that have reached the tipping point.
Right. I want to dig in particularly, we talked about productivity. Well, we mentioned productivity increase, sharper focus, and energy level becomes high. I want to dig in on the energy level piece. Yeah. In the book, you explain how anger, depression, hate, and frankly, for what is me is foremost, which is anxiety, how those drain our energy.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions about this specifically. First of all, why is that? Why does it steal my energy?
Sure. When I talk about energy, I'm specifically referring to emotional energy. A person can be in great physical shape, but just emotionally drained from the psychological stressors. And so emotional energy is the person's psychological capacity to effectively deal with the immediate stressors in their life, right here, right now. And we measure emotional energy on a scale of 0 to 100, just like your grading system. In the 90s an A, 80s a B, and so forth. And so the higher our emotional energy, the greater our psychological capacity at that very moment to deal with stressors. But most of us, our emotional energy is lower because of so much emotionality coming from life, which is depleting us. Now, specifically those negative emotions we talked about of anger, depression, anxiety, hatred.
Right. Okay. So what you're telling me is I have a certain reservoir of this.
Yeah.
That can get drained or worn down.
Yes.
And if that's the case, then I cannot bring my full mental capacity and my physical ability to bear on an instance.
And here's why that's so significant, is because time has no meaning in the preconscious mind. So these things that are emotionally charged could have happened a day or a week or years ago. But for many people, it can feel like they're right there, constantly draining us and having the amygdala flare up of some incident. Think of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a classic example of how this can be a chronic drain on a person. Now, what's important for me to explain here is that I'm not really into psychobabble. So when we talk about these emotions, what exactly are we dealing with here? So allow me to explain. Anger is really just emotional hurt. When you're hurting emotionally, the socially acceptable feeling is anger. But a lot of times we don't have the vocabulary words to describe the emotional hurt. Like I feel condescended or demeaned or dismissed. And we don't really talk like that. Depression is hurt held inward. When you hold all this emotional hurt in, you're either going to implode, which isn't good, or you're going to explode, which isn't good. When we talk about hatred is feeling threatened by. I hate her. Well, why do you really hate her? She has the opportunity to potentially take your starting position on the team or leapfrog you for a job promotion. And so therefore you might feel threatened. And then anxiety, that's fear of the unknown. When there are a lot of unknowns going on in the world, we just tend to feel more anxious. And specifically, when we think about depression, I find that the mind tends to wander into the past. With anxiety, it's because our mind is not in the here and the now, but it keeps slipping into the future, to the many unknowns, and cultivating and driving those feelings.
Well, thanks for breaking that down in particular. And so now I know, I guess, why anxiety is my biggest one. The second question, I said I had two. So how do we regulate our emotional energy then?
The first thing we need to do is use that rating system. Just be aware every day. Where am I at? Because 70 on that scale is what I call the tipping point. And positive thinking is when we're 70 and above. But once you hit 70 and go below that, negative thinking creeps in. And you're not nearly the better version of yourself. And so if we can understand where we're at on that scale, we can understand how do I recharge and refill my emotional energy. And I need to understand what's draining my emotional energy. But first and foremost, at any given moment, you have to say, where am I really at? It's a self-report number, but where am I really at on that scale?
So I think in my mind, that means I won't be caught off guard. I won't show up thinking that I'm going to be able to perform and then go, wait a minute, I'm not, because I will understand, hey, coming in, I wasn't mentally prepared, or in order to be mentally prepared, I need to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, of course, we would all show up with our A game, literally our emotional energy up in the 90s, but that's not reality. Life happens, and sometimes we have to find a way to compete, even when we're like Michael Jordan when he had the flu that time way back in the day.
Against the Utah Jazz in Game 6.
You got it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would imagine, 162 times a year, it's tough to be at 90, right? So
Well
you
said.
you got to learn how to play less than 90.
Yes.
Okay. So I thought it might be interesting to approach this with the same kind of progression as an elite athlete might in terms of their performing, right? So the progression in my mind would be training, pre-performance, performance, then post-performance evaluation. So let's talk about mental and emotional preparation as we train to start out with. In the book, you have a great quote by Muhammad Ali, which is, "The fight is won or lost far away from witness, behind the lines, in the gym, and out on the road, long before I dance under the lights," which is poetic. No surprise there from Muhammad Ali. I'm interested in your thoughts on this, the approach to training with regard to the mental preparation.
I believe strongly that for an athlete, the off season is where we make the greatest psychological jumps. In every off season, I'm asking athletes, what are you reading? What are you studying? What are you learning? What YouTube videos? Because in the off season, when we're away from the current stressors of the particular sport, that is when we have to build our psychological defenses. Our skills, our bodies, or rather our minds, skills and defenses to block out what needs to be blocked out. So we've got to educate. And that means seeking out mentors and picking the brains of other people that have gone before you. I literally encourage everyone to have a notebook or a notebook on their phone where they're writing down, taking down notes, but they've got to collect information from what other people are doing and putting that in their playbook. Now, I'm biased, but I really think that's where sports psychologists can be very helpful, because if they were practicing meditation and visualization, for example, again and again and again, that becomes a technique, one of the many tools in their mental toolbox that they can utilize in season.
Right. So the first thing that flashed into my head, it's so funny that you mentioned Jordan earlier. His coach was Phil Jackson.
Yes.
And Phil Jackson was constantly assigning books and movies and things you had to go do and kind of mental preparation. And they always said that his approach to the psychological side of the game was among the best. So I think that's what you're referring to specifically.
Phil Jackson always made his athletes have a book in their bag. He said there's so much downtime and travel time. And so he wanted them to be reading something that would grow them. I would challenge many athletes and most people today to say, what book are you reading? What are you actually learning? And this doesn't involve just scrolling through social media on your phone while you're on a bus ride. It means really learning from having a book in your bag.
Yeah, I think that, from my perspective, having something that's a different point of view from the normal things that I had, it causes me to kind of alter my point of view, or at least broaden my ability to think about other points of view. So that makes perfect sense. You mentioned meditating and communing. Can you talk about those with regard to training? We can talk about either one of them first, whatever you want.
When I think of communing, it's taking this stuff in the preconscious mind and connecting with something greater than yourself, a higher power, if you will. And you can call communing the act of visualization, meditation, self-reflecting, but really what I think it's about is prayer. However a person might define God to be, it's about trying to clear out the preconscious mind by talking with a power greater than yourself. So I happen to be a Christian, so whenever I get up every morning and start my day, I always pray through my day and all the people I'm going to be meeting with and the struggles that I know that they're going through. And I pray for my family and for others in need. And it's amazing how that daily habit of communing or prayer really helps me alleviate a lot of the tension in my preconscious mind, that the reality is there's no person or no way in the world that stuff is ever going to really get resolved. But if I can commune about that and put that on God, then I just feel like, whew, okay, I did the best I can with that stuff now.
Meditating?
Meditating is something I do every day, but I do that in the form of prayer. So more of a meditative prayer where I literally get down on my knees and quiet my mind and really just try to be still. And then just to begin to offer up the things that come to me but then also to listen.
Yeah, that's it. That stillness allows you to listen. You can't get there any other way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the meditation part, just go one step further in a slightly different direction. One really cool thing that I started doing is floating. Have you ever heard of that before?
Do tell.
Yeah. So floating is this really cool experience where it's parasympathetic nervous system, so it's very relaxing. But essentially you walk into a private room, take a shower, and hop in an oversized tub that's got about 6 inches of heavily salted water in it. And you float. But you have earplugs in that are really good. And then you turn off the lights and the room's really dark. So essentially you don't hear anything. You don't see anything. And you're just floating. So eventually your body, you don't even feel anything. And so what ends up happening is that you're just really alone with your thoughts.
Yeah, it's an isolation experience.
Isolation experience is exactly what it is. But you become aware of what's really in your mind, in your preconscious mind. And then you go to work on, how do I quiet that? Or how do I acknowledge what's in there and then let it be? And so it's a meditative experience that it's something that I think is super cool, and I highly recommend people try it.
Yeah, I'll definitely be Googling my nearest floating
Exactly.
experience there's got to be one in New York City someplace. Okay. There's another hard mental part to training. That's when you're doing the actual training itself, right? Vince Lombardi says that fatigue makes cowards of us all. Whether it's a training run or a weightlifting practice, or since I deal with a lot of founders, let's call it a particularly heavy coding session where you're coding for 18 hours on end in a dark room. And what is the process? Because you've mentioned this a couple times. What is the process for blocking out pain and fatigue during that time, during the training time?
I think that for individuals who can block that stuff out, that's a skill set that's been really developed slowly over time in their life. And it's a lot harder than people realize to have that type of emotional stamina. Now, I do link this thing back to what we're talking about regarding the preconscious mind. So how long can your emotional stamina be? Well, I would say, how clear is your preconscious mind? Because if your preconscious mind is clearer, you're going to endure a little bit longer. Just look at anybody who, when they go out for a run, when their mind's clear, they just go. And other people can't get through that marathon. Why? They're in great physical shape. So I think that part of it really goes back to how clear is your preconscious mind. The other part is how well developed is your psychological defenses to say, I have to, I must block out these distractions. And I am able to completely zone out the rest of the world. I do think that youth sports is a great training ground where people have these powerful learning opportunities to cultivate that skill.
So I guess that's back to Chris Everett's comment that competitive toughness is an acquired skill, not an inherited gift, right? She's talking about the practice associated with that.
Yes.
This is going to sound really strange, but I was riding the elevator up to our office this morning and I saw something that said people with a higher emotional IQ tend to be better at blocking out physical pain.
I believe it, because what we're talking about here is emotional intelligence. We're talking about emotional maturity, and they have a skill set, a mental toolbox, if you will, that they can access so many different techniques that could help them, where most people learned growing up to deal with negative emotions with a suck it up, don't whine, don't complain. That's great. That's good. But if that's your primary or your only way to deal with negative emotions, you can be pretty limited.
Yeah. So the thing about practice is it usually happens every day. And, it's one thing to rise to the occasion for a marathon, right? At that moment. It's another thing to be physically strong, having done all the training, without allowing that practice to grind you down, both mentally and physically. Is there any tips that you have for how to keep practice from grinding you down so you're not at your peak?
Yep. It's actually real simple. The biggest problem we have in America is, and this is going to sound a little dramatic, The cell phone addiction is our generation's form of cigarettes. And if you ask many and most people, they'll tell you they're lying in their bed, looking at their phones, and they're getting anti-melatonin from the blue light at a time when their brain's trying to release the melatonin and get to sleep. They're scrolling through social media, which has a high correlation with depression. So we're getting sleep deprivation and a daily dose of depression every night. That's why the average athlete sleeps 6.5 hours in college, but the reality is they need far more than that. And so if you don't want to have the training grind you down, the very first place we need to start, let's talk about the cell phone addiction, and particularly regarding sleep.
Wow. Not the answer I was expecting.
Yeah.
But take note. I want to drop in. I think this might be a place, at least in my mind, to drop in a little bit of a discussion on self-talk. I think that as a runner, I've done the last 5 or 6 Brooklyn halves, and it's coming up again in third week in May. So I'm in the middle of my training. I'm kind of at the 8 or 9 mile per run mark, and I've got a couple more to go, right? And so I'm in that moment where self-talk is becoming important to me, right?
Yes.
Got to will my way. So give us a little bit, if you would. First of all, just explain to people what it is. I could, but you could probably do it better. And then I'm going to ask you about what I need to start telling myself.
Sure, absolutely. So the internalized messages, we all internalize messages from around us, and they actually go into the preconscious mind. And so as you think about your run, for example, there are different voices that kind of come up from within us. A voice of a parent or an old coach or somebody that you would admire as an athlete. And so if you would, think of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Imagine there's a round table there, and there's 12 people, and they're all different versions of you. One voice there is the really hard on you, hey, you need to suck it up and push through. And another voice is, nah, take care of yourself, be wise, be smart. Another one's like, hey, you've got great aspirations and you can do this and just dig a little deeper. And so we all have those different voices around us. And at any given time, we talk about self-talk. It's really like the competing voices in our head that are around that table. And we need to tell some of them to just sit down and shut up. And the other ones we get empowered to say, hey, come on, we need you a little bit more right now.
Yeah, speak up.
Yeah.
Speak into the microphone, please. All right. And so the people that I'm telling, all right, we need you more, what are they saying? Are they saying, is it as simple as you can do it, a little bit more, one foot after the other? Or is there a higher level, higher order self-talk that I can start tapping into, which I would like to be able to do?
I think so. I think it's really the best version of ourselves, right? And when we are training, when we're competing, when we're in those situations, what we really need is that encourager. And too often, we're the hardest on ourselves. We beat ourselves up. But if we can encourage ourselves more, and a simple phrase in self-talk that can absolutely change one's entire experience is, you got this. You got this. You got this. Because most of us struggle with anxiety, and anxiety is fear of the unknown, but the antidote to anxiety is reassurance. So the more we reassure oneself, as opposed to looking for it from external sources, then we find a way to combat our own anxiety through self-reassurance. And a simple mantra of, I got this, I got this, I got this, can become a skill set and a habit that can have a significant impact, especially in those moments when one's training.
Well, thank you for that. Let's move on to the pre-event preparation. So let's call that the 24 hours before competing. There's a lot running through your conscious and preconscious mind. I assume having a process to both quiet the mind and kind of get into the glide path to compete optimally are pretty important, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that process. If you can give us a little help about what it ought to look like.
If we're specifically talking about game day or a day when we have something really significant, one technique that I think is really valuable is we have to engage the parasympathetic nervous system and really kind of suppress the sympathetic nervous system. So if you think about it, the sympathetic nervous system is go, 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 go. The parasympathetic is relax, relax, relax. And for many people, when they have something significant they're going to do that day, they're going to experience nervousness, which is normal and natural. Now, I reframe nervousness to just mean I'm going to do something important today. If I'm feeling nervous, that's good because it's going to be something I'm going to remember.
But at the same time, that's the energy. That's burning a ton of energy.
Which is why if we reframe it, now it's not the enemy. It's actually, it's something I'm working with. I'm using this fuel. So, wow, that's nervousness. That's really cool. Like, I'm going to do something important today. However, we need to harness that energy. So every athlete I work with has a relaxing playlist on their phone. Piano music with no lyrics. Danny Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, is the artist that I like the most. And the reason is because all of his music is really in an alpha brainwave state, which is parasympathetic. And his music is music that people haven't likely heard as much. So he doesn't play publicly very often, but he's fantastic. And he's got many, many CDs. And he doesn't sing, which is key. And a lot of it's his own original music. So when you listen to music such as Danny Wright, what happens is your mind just begins to feel a little bit more relaxed and at ease, but you're not thinking of like the memory associated with that song or getting sucked into the lyrics. It's literally just engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, suppressing the sympathetic, and keeping us a bit more calm and relaxed until that identified moment when it's time to really switch. Now listen to your playlist that gets you fired up. If we do that, we conserve our emotional energy during the day, we harness it, and then we release it at the desired time.
No, I like that. You mentioned a couple times leading up to now about visualization. I think this seems like a good, in the moments, in the 24 hours or a couple of hours before an event or a contest, talk about that process and what it ought to look like.
So I really suggest that if somebody's going to do visualization, they do that about 3 hours before they compete. And so I've created a visualization CD. It's about 26 minutes long, which is about the optimal time for a nap. And what the visualization is really doing is pushing your brainwave to more of a theta brainwave, which is more relaxed than alpha, but not quite asleep. It's, for the layperson, it would be that experience of when you're lying in your bed and you're not asleep, but you're not really awake and you're kind of drifting out while you're watching TV. That's theta brainwave. And visualization will push your brain to that experience. And when you're there, what we're trying to do is really implant positive imagery and suggestions into the preconscious mind so that when you do engage, those are some of the images and voices that you would hear while you're competing. But that process of being deeply relaxed, I think, is really effective about 3 hours or more before we actually compete. As it gets a little closer, we want to shift more to a alpha brainwave, a Danny Wright.
Right.
And it's okay right before you compete to close your eyes and visualize a little bit. But the deeper experience of visualization, that's the optimal time to do it.
So I probably asked this out of order, but I want to touch on it before we move on. I've heard you mention in the past something, a 1 hour pre-sleep routine. You think that's worth talking about? This even in the kind of 24 hour prior to competition?
It's huge.
Time? Okay,
let's
talk about it.
And it's the biggest problem. And the reason is this: every evening, you and I and everyone will have a yawn, a really significant yawn, a big yawn come over us. And when we have that, that's the brain's release of melatonin. About an hour after that yawn, we would ideally fall asleep. But what happens for many people in America is that when we have that yawn, we think, oh boy, wow, I got to push through, man. I got so much more I got to accomplish before I go to bed at night. What we really should be doing is saying, you know what, there's the yawn. I'm shutting down all electronics, dimming the lights. Maybe I'm going to take a shower, have a small snack, read a book for pleasure. but we have to ramp down the brain. Most of the times we are on electronics, which is then giving us the anti-melatonin when the brain's trying to release melatonin. Thus, we miss that window we ideally would fall asleep, and we get our second wind, which will keep us up for about an hour and a half until the next big sleep wave comes over us.
Yeah, so you're saying don't screw with your circadian rhythm.
Do not mess with that at all. The reality is, especially for a college athlete, their circadian rhythm is all over the place. And for many people, their circadian rhythm is very inconsistent, especially when they throw it off on the weekends, because it takes 3 nights of consistent sleep to get yourself back on track until you feel really good.
Yep, I know that. All right, it's tangential. It's not non sequitur entirely. It's tangential. But sir, if you're an athlete and you're thinking about or perhaps talking about fear of failure, which is also known as performance anxiety, if you're doing that before an event, you're probably already in a difficult spot. But from your position as a sports psychologist, what advice do you give to someone about managing their emotions to kind of minimize the anxiety before a big moment?
Yeah. The reality is, if you're in that big moment and you're feeling it, you probably didn't do the work.
You've already missed it. That train already left the station.
Yeah. Hence, it goes all the way back to what we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, which is it was about the all-season training.
Wow.
And so you need to train your mind over and over again. So when that moment comes, it's as though I've already done this so many times and I've got a whole bag of mental tricks that I could access.
Yeah.
But if that moment did occur, what would I say to that person right away? Change your physiology, meaning step outside, get some fresh air, take a deep breath, go get a sip of water, do whatever you possibly can, but like change your physiology. And if that might mean like go in the locker room, take a shower and put your clothes back on again and then come back out. Anything to dramatically change the physiology can break the pattern that they're stuck in.
Yeah. Change your frame.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm moving on again. So now we are in the moment. It's time to perform. There's a situation, a story that I observed when I was watching the Olympics recently, and I know that you don't know this particular athlete, but I'm going to read the story out loud just because I found it so pertinent to the moment and to the extent that you're able within a distance. I'd love your thoughts on it. This is Winter Olympics. There's a 17-year-old kid named Red Jarrod, and he's competing in the men's slopestyle snowboard event for the United States. In the days leading up to the event, he spends his time binge watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is a sitcom on Netflix. And the morning of the event, he ignores his alarm, and his roommate wakes him up 20 minutes later. He's nearly late. This allows him, he nearly misses the competition altogether, right? And so he scurries out of his room. He can't even find his own jacket. He puts on his roommate's jacket, and he heads over to the snowboard event. And on the very first, he gets three shots at it, right? On the very first time, he wipes out in his first of the 3 runs. On his second run, he takes a risk by trying a 1080 off the quarter pipe. And the significant part about that is that it's not the middle ramp. And as a result of that, there's concern that he won't get high enough and get enough momentum to get to the next jump, right? So he's taking this huge, whopping risk. He ends up landing the thing, and he's only 5'6" and he weighs like 156, right? So there's a physics that comes into play as well. So it turns out that wasn't a problem, right? He hits a landing completely perfectly, and then he closes the run with a backside triple cork 1440. I don't even know what that is. He scores 87 points. And he didn't even need to take his final run because that was enough to win. And it got the U.S. its first gold medal, right? And so the reason that I thought this story was particularly interesting was because we just talked about nervousness, anxiety, emotional energy, fear of failing. this guy was sleeping late and watching sitcoms right up to the moment. I contend that, mentally he was doing exactly the right thing because, he was not thinking. He was not concerned that he was allowing himself to react. And I wanted to see what you think about a scenario like this, where then the person goes out and peak performs.
Well, I don't know Red. I really admire so many aspects of this story, and particularly his ability to manage anxiety beforehand. But really the most fascinating part of the story for me is actually this concept called dissociation. And it's particularly relating to his emotional resiliency. Because you see, he did get there and underperform on his first run. But he bounced back with his greatest performance ever when it mattered the most. And so in there, I think, is the most fascinating part. And so what I want to highlight is that word dissociation. It's a psychobabble term that really means a significant emotional shift. I mean, old school psychology would call it multiple personalities. And the reality is we all have multiple personalities, and we all have to shift into an extreme mindset in order to do something so remarkable. You might meet a professional athlete and say, wow, that person seems really nice. I have a hard time imagining them being so aggressive on the football field. Well, for that individual, they've got to shift, right? Just like Clark Kent becomes Superman and Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man, this kind of emotional shift. And a lot of times when an athlete does something where they perform poorly, the great ones have this unique ability to really dial in and get super, super focused. They make this shift to an extreme mindset that many people dream of and wish they could get there, but they don't know how, or they can't access it, or just despite their best efforts, they can't get there consistently. To Red's credit, in that situation, he got there when it mattered the most. And when a human being is there, the challenges that we're talking about, they seem to just disappear. Time has no meaning. Energy has no meaning. And it's just a state of flow where one is going to do, without a doubt, exactly what they believe they can.
So I would have thought that was, people say, oh, he's got a really short memory, just forget. Or that was compartmentalization. But what you're really talking about actually is getting into the zone.
Yes.
And so we're going to circle back to Jordan. I have to talk to Jordan about this. So the best example that I can think of about getting into the zone is the 1992 NBA Finals, right? And Jordan hits what was then a record 6 3-pointers in the first half. After the 6th one, he's running back down the court, and he sees Magic Johnson, who's courtside, and he just shrugs his shoulders as if to say, I don't know how I'm doing it. Normally the guy hits about 30% from behind the arc, right? And so he's 6 for 6 on that particular night. He couldn't miss. He was in the zone. So let's talk about, you mentioned about how elite athletes get in the zone. Let's ask the question about how mere mortals can help themselves get into the zone as far as peak performance goes. Anything you can tell us to help? Like, I'm not going to be hitting any 3-pointers, by the way, but I'm dying to be able to at least feel it.
Steve, what you're asking for right there is analogous to the search for the Holy Grail. This is the Holy Grail in sports psychology, right? Like, tell me how to get in the zone, and I want to get there like consistently and often and repeatedly. And please just give me 2 or 3 things that I can possibly do to make this happen. And the reality is, you, me, and everybody else, this is really what we're searching for. But what we do know is that there are some things that can be done to increase the likelihood that we are going to actually be in the zone.
Okay.
And a big part of that goes back to the mantra we talked about earlier of clear mind, better performance. When the mind is clearer, you're not operating with 10% of your mind. You're operating with all of your mind. There's so much more capability within us. And so we always want to start there with how do we increase the zone? The second thing is it really does come down to sleep. We have to understand that sleep is the number one factor in performance.
Yeah.
We want to manage anxiety. We want to be in the zone. If we're not properly rested, it's very difficult for us to really access the zone.
Yeah.
And the third thing is just understanding that when it comes to the zone, it's all these variables come together in the perfect time, in the perfect way that we could probably never have orchestrated on our own. But we understand that it is special and it is great, and we just enjoy it for what it is, and we hope that we could replicate it despite our best efforts often too.
This is so sad because I had built this whole thing up about learning, and now I'm just going to have to hope that at some point the world comes together and find Zen
I'm
and
sorry to be the realist.
Okay, yeah. Hey, all right. Someone had to tell me. Anyway, so we're at the final couple questions here. So right now the contest is over, right? Either I've won or I've lost. What do I do now so that then I take away what I need from this experience so that the next time I compete even better?
Sure. We give ourselves 24 hours to process the event, and I think that's really important. But I do think that we have to focus on any positive aspect of our recent performance. And that's what we want to think about moving forward as we walk around and we have our self-talk and we're mentally rehearsing. Too often in life, we'll replay the negative aspects. We only want to go over the negatives at practice with a coach when they're there and we're actually going to work on it. But if you're not actually going to work on that negative aspect, don't think about it. We need to build confidence, but in order to build confidence, you have to have the building material. And that's the small positive aspect from any performance. So what I've seen for high performers is that they keep building their confidence from those constantly thinking about the small positive aspect. Now, in the short term, that's what we do. But here's the bigger lesson. For an athlete in season, what I've noticed is that for every 1 month that an athlete goes really hard, they need a 1 week recovery when it's over. So if you look at a typical athlete, they may say, well, my season was 3 or 4 months where I went really hard. Well, after 4 months, you're going to experience a crash. And it's going to be about 4 weeks before you actually feel really good again. And so allow your body to crash. Sometimes you'll get sick, get a cold, just have low motivation. You'll start sleeping a whole lot. And that's normal and natural. And so when you have the crash and you allow yourself to have good recovery after a season, then you're going to say, I really want to get back to training. I really want to get after this again.
Right. And so just to circle up then, is there anything out of that experience, that post-competition experience, that I want to make sure that I clear it out of my preconscious, or that I want to make sure that I don't know. I really don't know the answer to this. Maybe the answer is no, there's not. But I had this sense that, okay, if there's something that's negative about the experience, it can hover in my preconscious and that could be bad for me.
And if it's there and one is aware of it, that's really where I want to advocate for get together with sports psychologists. Talk about this stuff, process this stuff. The off season is really significant. And this is especially true for coaches who continually suck it up and just keep going through day to day. But in the off season, they've got to work through that stuff so that it doesn't lead to this accumulation. And little by little, they say our issues get stored in our tissues and the coach has a heart attack in his 50s. We don't want to see that.
Okay.
So what we've got to do is clear out the preconscious mind by really processing, talking about. It sounds overly simplistic, but there's something so profound when we have heart-to-heart, open, honest dialogue about things that are kind of irking us or bothering us, and especially knowing that they're in legally protected conversations so nobody else in the world can know about them, then we can really emote and experience catharsis, which is a freeing of emotion. And when we're able to just really put the past in the past, and here's the key, when you process it later, you're really processing it at a higher emotional energy level, and you're rethinking it differently than the way it was encoded in the brain the very first time. So it went in when you weren't in a good spot. You were pretty hot on the sideline and you were pretty emotional. But then it's springtime and your stress is a lot lower, your emotional energy is a lot higher, and you really go back and you open up that file and you're like, let's review that game. Let's see what happened. And then it gets stored and encoded back in your brain in a much different way.
Right.
And suddenly you're like, you know what? I think I'm done with that incident. That's over with, and I can move on. And that's why talking about our stuff is so important for everybody to keep the preconscious mind clearer so we can continually perform at our best.
Yeah. I'm thinking Russell Wilson and the interception on the last play of the Patriots game. He said he didn't even look at it for the next 9 months. Then he went back, finally did. Makes sense. Okay. That's the prepared questions that I have. Anything that I've left out? Anything that you want to talk about?
So many things I'd love to talk about, but I'm going to defer to you.
Okay.
On maybe what you want to address.
I think that's a nice arc. So I think we should stop there. Where can people find you on the internet or otherwise so that they can take advantage of your knowledge?
Sure. I lead a company called Mind of the Athlete.
Yep.
So mindoftheathlete.com. My latest book is Mind of the Athlete, Clear Mind, Better Performance. That's available on our website, also on Amazon, and of course, all over our social medias.
And social media, right? And then you can just put in Dr. Spencer, Jarrod
Dr.
Spencer.
Jarrod Spencer, Jarrod, or you can put in Mind of the Athlete as well.
Same one. Dr. Spencer, that's it. Thank you very much. It's been very nice talking to you face to face. Appreciate your time.
I'm grateful you value this, and I hope it's to help the people listen to it as well.
This has been Intangibles. I'd like to thank Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com for being the sponsor this season and a supportive partner. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. I'd like to thank VC Careers for their support, and I'd also like to thank Ben Glawe, who's a fantastic sound engineer. It is a privilege to work with him. Find him on Twitter. His handle is @visible_sound. And thank you. Keep an eye out for the next episode. I'm your host, Steve Berg.